Thank you. Please, um, I'm seeing about 10 persons on this platform now, plus my body said making it 11. So, and I've only received confirmation from 3 persons. I need to hear from you guys to know that everybody is hearing me so that we can move at the same page. The response I'm getting is okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, today basically we'll be looking at operations management, which is our focus for today, and try and share my screen so that we page. Before we move on, please, I guess you guys did not find anything too strange in this thing we did. That's your CBA quiz that you guys did. Is there anything extremely strange in what you guys did there? Okay. Well, this no response is an indication that maybe you guys were okay with it. So today, we've been discussing this operations management from different dimension, but today we'll be looking at operation and production strategy. Like I said, we are just basically following what we have in your note. So we'll be looking at production and operation strategy. Now, when we say production strategy, what do we mean? When we say production strategy, or when we say operation strategy or manufacturing strategy, what basically do we mean? Now, you remember at the beginning of this course, I told us that we'll be using production and operation interchangeably, and the concept of manufacturing or production is also the same. So don't get caught up with some of these terminologies. They are all the same thing. So when we say production or manufacturing or operating strategy, we are still talking about the same thing. All right. So now we say that operation strategy is the total pattern of decision which shape the long-term capacity of any type of operation and their contribution to the overall strategy. Now, operation or production strategy has to do with the sum total of all the long-term activities or plan that enables an organization to remain competitive in the market, that enables an organization's product to remain viable in the market, that enables an organization, one, either to be a cost leader or to be the best innovative company by way of product differentiation. So this concept of operation strategy provides a platform that enables an organization to come up with a long-term approach to being able to remain viable in the market where the firm is operating. Now, when I told you that when we talk about operation, okay, as the production strategy or the operation strategy has to do with everything surrounding the production of a particular product or service that the organization is what is offering. Now, you cannot function in an isolation. In other words, the production department cannot function in an isolation from the marketing department, the finance department, the human resource department, because each of these units will have to put their skills together in order to get the best out of the organization. And so the production cannot function independently and expect to make the maximum profit, because the sole aim of a profit-making organization is to maximize profit. It has to work together with the operation and with the marketing department, because it is the marketing department that will take the products to the customers. Now, it at the same time has to work with the finance department, because the finance department has the responsibility to procure all the funds that is needed to execute all the projects that the firm is undergoing. At the same time, it has to work with the human resource department. So each of these departments will have to work collectively, and that is why we say that the operation system or operation strategy cannot be formulated in isolation. It has to incorporate every other department. The strategy incorporates every other department that I just mentioned. We said operation strategy must be linked vertically to the customers and the customers' needs and desire, horizontally to other parts of the organizational activity. Now, what we are saying is the strategy you are formulating, because customers are the king in the market. Customers are the king in the market. And for you to be able to get your product, have a larger share of the market, you must be able to identify what customers need and what they desire, and be able to provide those things they desire. Okay. Now, that's what we mean by this strategy. Will have to be linked to what the customers need and what desire, because you are not just producing for the purpose of producing. We have the trend in production process have moved beyond just producing and sending to the market. But the era we are in now is the era whereby we first of all identify what the customers need, and then we now return back to produce what the customers need and supply it to them. Not just producing what we think that the customers need, then to push it to the market, persuading them to buy what we think they need. So that is what we mean by this strategy. We have to first of all incorporate what is the need of the customers, what is there. Okay. Now, this is at the vertical level. At the horizontal level, it has to incorporate every other activities of the organization, like the human resource that is responsible for procuring the manpower and managing the human resources of the organization. They have to all be incorporated. Now, the framework of operation strategy provides a linkage between one, what customer needs and what they desire; two, the performance parameters for manufacturing operations; three, the operations and other related enterprise resource capabilities to satisfy these needs. Now, if you look at the linkage, we have to first of all start by the needs of the customer. Let us look at the framework, the diagrammatical representation of the framework. This is a typical representation of the framework. You find this in your material. Now, what is the operational strategy? The operational strategy begins with focusing on the customer. It begins with focusing on the customer, knowing exactly what the customers want, what the customers need, and being able to provide the needs of the customer, right? Now, and having been able to provide the needs of the customer, having been able to identify what the customers need, the next thing is now the product or the service. If you look at the trend, you don't go to the product first or the service you want to give first. you start with the customer. That's why we call it customer focus. So you start with the customer, find out what the customers need, find out what they desire. This is the only way, because the essence of all this strategy is to remain competitive in the market, because your product is not the only product in the market. Okay, so you must be prepared and willing to identify what the customers need and their desire. Then you now come back to look at the product and services to provide to them. What are you producing? What service are you giving them? Those things they have identified as their needs. So now the understanding of this customer focus will now tell you whether the current product you have will be able to meet these needs or their desire, or whether it will now require you to do what, to repackage the current product that you have or introduce a new product entirely. Okay, now, but all this will have to come after you have assessed the needs and the desire of the customers. Now, whether it is a new product, whether it is a new feature or a repackaging of an existing product, you have to now decide that after you have known what the customers need. Now, let's say you have discovered that what you need is a new product, or probably what you need is to repackage a current product. Remember, the same way you have identified that goods or these services, that is how your competitor have at the same time identified the needs of those your customers. Now, the next thing now is for us to look at our performance capabilities and what strength. When we looked at SWOT analysis, I discussed with you people about what the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Now, when you look at the strength, whenever we talk about strength, we're talking about the internal capacity of an organization. But when we talk about opportunity, we're talking about those external advantages that a firm enjoys. Now, for you to remain competitive in the market, having identified the need of the customers and having identified the relevant product that will suit them, there becomes a need for you to now produce using the internal strength you have. Okay, to produce those products either with the best variety, in other words, a very strong, differentiated or flexible product that will attract the customers, or you are using your capacity to produce these goods and services at the minimal cost. In other words, becoming a cost leader in the market. These are the two key conditions of that which you can be a market leader. One, either you are having a differentiated product, or you are the lowest cost leader. Now, these are the key strengths or performance capacities that you must possess in order to either produce this new product that you need to supply to the customers, having identified the need, or repackage an existing product to be able to meet the needs of those customers. Now, what are the elements that will help you in this your performance capabilities? One, technology. Technology has become one of the fastest avenue through which companies becomes strongly competitive in the marketplace, because technology can give you a speedy advantage. Okay, even though that the life cycle of most of the technologies that we have is very short, but technology is one of the things that gives you a very speedy advantage over your competitor. So you need to look at what strengths do you have in the area, what are your capacity in the area of technology. Then another thing is in the area of research and development base. Do you have a very strong research and development base to actually go into a new product? Do you have a strong research and development base to go into, repackaging your product with all that it needs, either adding more cost to it or removing what's already there and adding more, either increasing in the size and all the rest? You have all the research and development capacity. Now, when we talk about this, research and development plays more role in the new product, assuming you want to offer new product. Okay, there is a lot to be done in the area of research and development if you must send a new product to your customer. Now, the next thing is the system that you have in place. Do you have a very strong system in place that can drive this process that we're talking about? Do you have a very strong system that can drive your process without time lag in the implementation process? Because some systems have a lot of bottlenecks, that a process cannot just run smoothly without bottlenecks. And in a competitive environment, you have a very limited time, okay, to get your product out to your customers. Then the next thing is what? People. Do you have the relevant human capital resources to deliver? Whether you are talking about a new product or you are talking about a packaging already existing product, do you have the human capacity to do all it takes in terms of the human resources and the human capacity to deliver on that? That is what we mean by people. Now, physical distribution. Now, physical distribution has become so important, because if you produce what the customers need, because when we talked about utility, we talked about form utility, we talked about time utility, and we talked about place utility. Now, this physical distribution will help us to fulfill this both time and place utility. All other ones we have talked about will help us achieve the form utility, which is the actual product itself. But the place and the time utility will have to come by physical distribution. A customer would have to get the product at a very convenient place, and at the same time will be able to get it when he needs it without any time lag. So this is the role that the physical distribution will have to play. What is the chain of your suppliers? Okay, that once the product comes out, the chains of suppliers will move it down to retailers, and then before it begins to get into the hand of customers. Now, having understood the performance capabilities, there is also need for us to understand, like if you look at this chart, the performance capability will either enable us to develop a new product that we send, okay, to our customers according to their need. It will also help us to do what? To effectively deliver the product and then render after sales service where the need arises. Because there is what we call cognitive dissonance. In other words, it is a term that is used to describe after sales regret or after purchase regret by customers. Every profit-making organization, its intention is to elicit repeat purchase. To elicit what? Repeat purchase. And for you to elicit repeat purchase, you will have to do everything humanly possible to avoid cognitive dissonance. In other words, to avoid customers regretting buying that product in the first instance. Now, if you succeed in ensuring that your customers don't regret buying this product in the first instance, rather they are now happy, then it will give room for repeat purchase. And that is why it is from repeat purchase that we begin to build brand loyalty. Okay? Until you begin to have repeat purchase, which will now begin to degenerate into brand loyalty, you have not had the market share at that point. And what are the things that will help you to achieve repeat purchase? By being able to do what? To render effectively after sales service. Okay? All these things must be provided according to the customer's need. Now, outside this chart is another quadrant known as the support service. Like we said before, that the operation strategy cannot be performed in isolation. And because it cannot be performed in isolation, we will have the need for the finance department to provide their own support, the human resource to provide their own support, the management to provide their own support, information technology and other units to provide their own support, marketing to provide their own support. Everything will have to provide their own support, because for instance, the finance department will have the responsibility to provide the funding needed to execute any of these decisions that has been reached, whether to go in for a new product or to repackage, an existing one according to the needs of the customers. So this is actually the framework, okay, for operational strategy. Now, everything we'll be discussing will have to, center around this framework. Now, the next thing, if you look at what? Somebody is saying something. Okay, please help me and turn off your mic once we sign in. Okay. Now, it is one thing to have a wonderful strategy, like we have just discussed, which is customer focused. Your strategy is customer focused. You have looked at your performance capabilities and strengths. You have designed a very wonderful service, after sales service. We've offered a new product, but it is very important for management to ensure that production capacity constantly fits into the overall organizational objective. What do you mean by that? Let it not be that the operational strategy or production strategy we're talking about is focusing on one aspect of the organizational strategy instead of looking at the holistic approach of the entire organization. Let us ensure, that the production or the operational strategy is not just about maybe producing good at the lowest possible cost, because we understand that there is a trade-off between the lowest possible cost and quality. Most times when you want to achieve the lowest possible cost, you might begin now to compromise on quality. At the same time, when you want to pursue flexibility, in other words, when you want to pursue product differentiation, you might begin to compromise on cost. Okay. Now, there is need for an overhaul in the whole strategy to ensure that the strategy that the organization is adopting at the production level is in congruence with the overall organizational strategy. Now, a sound strategic analysis involves examination of major competitors in the industry and its market, identifying its structural strengths and weaknesses. Now, having looked at the overall organizational strategy, you'll also agree that for you to remain competitive in the market, your strategy must first of all look at who are your major competitors in the industry where you are operating. Who are your major competitors? Okay. What is your own market share and what is the market share of your competitor? You must conduct a very solid feasibility study of your competitor, the market share, and then identify your structural strengths and weaknesses. Until you are able to do this, most of your strategies will begin to have issues by the time you get to the point of implementation, because you will now execute and you discover that by the time you finish executing, your competitor is 5 months ahead of what you are about to do or what you are doing currently, while your competitor have already launched a product that you are still thinking you are bringing into the market. That is why it is important for us to understand the need for developing and implementing production strategy with an understanding of the holistic approach, and at the same time we look at our competitors and the market. Now, there are two main objectives of this production or operation strategy. The first is for the translation of required performance parameter into
specific performance requirements. What do we mean by performance parameters? Whenever we talk about performance parameters, there are 4 key performance parameters that we'll be looking at. Now, these key parameters are what will either make an organization to be a cost leader or a more innovative firm by way of product differentiation. What are these performance parameters? 1, we talk about cost. 2, we talk about quality. And 3, we talk about what dependability and what flexibility. These are the key performance parameters. Now, we must ensure that the objective of this strategy is to ensure that we transform the required performance parameter into a specific performance requirement. What do we mean by this? We have a target requirement for each one's parameter. In terms of quality, there is a minimum acceptable quality we want. In terms of cost, there is a minimum cost we want to incur. In terms of the dependability, there is a certain level of dependability we want to enjoy in our product. In terms of flexibility, there is also a certain level we want to enjoy. So on that note, we'll have to ensure that the performance parameter align to this our specific performance requirement. Now, the next two is to make sure, make necessary plan to ensure that the operations capabilities are sufficient to meet performance requirements. You will have to ensure that your operation capabilities, what are those operation capabilities? Those things we have identified as your performance strengths, okay? Talk about technology, talk about research and development, talk about people, talk about systems, talk about so many other things we've just discussed in the area of what your capabilities. You will ensure that you have sufficient capability, 1, to produce a minimum cost, 2, to produce a product with the highest quality at a minimal cost, a dependable product, and a product that is flexible. Please, somebody's mic is on. Can you just turn it so that I won't be having this rubber? Okay, to satisfy the performance parameter, production strategy must consistently involve different managerial groups in prioritizing for production performance criteria like cost, quality, dependability, and flexibility. In other words, there is need for every managerial group to focus on the priority that the production strategy is designed to achieve. If we are interested in cost reduction, let's say the production department is interested in cost reduction, the marketing department shouldn't be fighting about flexibility, because there is always a trade-off between cost reduction and flexibility. Similarly, it is important to note that there exists a trade-off between each of the 4 performance criteria. The marketing group should understand the trade-off between flexibility in product design and production costs. Just what we have explained, to achieve higher flexibility comes with with a higher cost. So you cannot achieve 2 of them at the same time. There is always a trade-off. Secondly, the production group must also understand the trade-off between cost reduction and product flexibility. There is a trade-off between the 2 of these. Now, they should also understand the trade-off between quality and cost, because a qualitative product will have a direct relationship with cost. Now, a successful strategic planning depends to a large extent on the involvement and commitment of top managers. A strategic planning, to a great extent, depends on the involvement and commitment of top managers. Every top level manager, whether in the area of finance, in the area of human resources, in the area of IT, whichever area you are at the top management level, the success of every strategic planning depends on what the level of involvement. Because actually, you know, when we discussed about levels of decisions, okay, we talked about strategic decision, we talked about tactical decision, and we talked about operational decision. And you also will agree that this strategic decision or strategic planning has to be, you know, done at the top management level. Okay, so for it to be effectively implemented or for it to be successful, the top managers who are responsible for this strategic planning must be in it, and they must all be involved significantly. Now, what we mean by every every top management being involved, we are talking about the involvement of what key persons from marketing, from personnel, and involved in this strategic planning. Now, we have key steps in developing a strategic plan. What are the key steps we need to take in developing a strategic plan? One, we have what we call situation analysis or production audit. So we have developed strategic alternative. The third step is select a strategy in harmony with what? With the enterprise strategy. In other words, a strategy that is in congruence with the overall objective of the organization. Formulate a detailed plan and budget to implement the strategy. The last part of it is talking about what? Implementation strategy. Because you will have a beautiful operational strategy, but if you can't implement it, it is as good as what? Nothing. So what do we mean by what? Situational analysis. This is what? Analyzing the current state of our product or services in the market. Analyze the current, conduct a production audit of one, our current production process, the state of our product in the market. In the process of doing this, remember we're talking about how to develop strategic work plan. Now, in the process of doing this production audit, you will be able to identify the bottlenecks, the challenges that our current production process is having. And having identified them in the production audit, okay, the next step, which is talking about developing strategic alternatives. Now, all these flaws we have identified through production audits, all those flaws we've identified, we will now have to develop strategic alternative, either to, you know, improve on what is already in existence or to change the process in order to get the desired result. Okay, so that is the second step after you have conducted your production audit. Now, having identified those strategic alternatives, next thing is now to select strategic alternatives. And you must ensure that whichever alternative you are selecting, we need to alignment with the overall strategy of the organization. You cannot select an alternative that is, you know, in contradiction with the overall strategy of the organization. Now, the last, which is what? Formulate detailed plan and budget to implement the strategy. What is your plan on how to ensure that this strategy is implemented? Because it's one thing to have a good strategy, like I said, but another thing to have effective implementation. Now, in the development of strategic alternatives, there are key questions that we must have to answer to be able to effectively develop an alternative, a strategic alternative. One, what we are trying to achieve. We must first of all find out what are we trying to achieve. Is it to achieve product differentiation so that in terms of innovativeness, our company will be considered as the most innovative company in the market? Or Are we looking at what? Being the cost leader? In other words, producing our product at the lowest possible cost that no other competitor will produce at that level of what cost. You have to fight that. What are the problems with current strategy and their implementation? Remember, we talked about what before you move into this strategic alternative development, you must first of all conduct what we call production audit. Now, production audit is to review the current happenings. So, and that is this question we're asking now. What is the problem with the current strategies that we have? And what is the problem with their implementation? Until we answer this question, whichever strategy we might formulate might still end up like the current, not be producing the desired results. The next question will be whether the available capacity is sufficient. Do we have available capacity? Our level of technological advancement, is this sufficient enough to carry this strategy? The level of research and development we want to embark on, do we have the financial resources to fund it? The human capital resources we need, do we have them? Can they be sourced? So these are the things that we need to be able to ask, and our ability to provide these answers will help us develop a good strategic alternative. The next thing is whether the technology that is used currently is appropriate. Is the current technology appropriate, or do we need to do what? To improve on the current technology. That is how you can develop a strategic alternative. The next is, if the firm is not cost competitive. What do we mean by not cost competitive? In other words, we are not a cost leader. Our competitors are leading us in the market in terms of lowest cost producers. Now, if the firm is not cost competitive, how can we change this situation? In other words, when we have our competitors leading us in terms of the lowest cost producer, how can we change this situation? Answers to this question will help you formulate a good strategic alternative. And the last one said, what control technique are available to maintain the performance level? Remember, we talked about what required performance. Now, what control technique do we have to put in place to ensure that this our required or this level of performance we desire will be achieved? So these questions and answers to this question will help you to formulate and develop a strong strategic alternative. Okay. Now, the next thing is implementation of our strategy. Evidence have shown that effectiveness of any plan or strategy can only be assessed when it is implemented. It is only when you implement a strategy that you will be able to know to what extent is this strategy viable, to what extent is this strategy effective, to what extent is this strategy, on point with what we want this strategy to be. So that is the need for following up our implementation. The developed strategy must be communicated to everyone who has a role in its implementation. One of the key undoing to strategies is poor communication. Poor communication. Please, can you just turn off your microphone? Poor communication is one of the things that affect our implementation strategy. The people who need to do one thing or the other in order to effectively deliver on this strategy must know what is expected of them, and before they are assigned to do those things, the supervisors or the managers or the line managers must know that they have the capacity to deliver on it and then effectively communicate it to them. It is only when they are properly communicated that we are sure that we will be able to get a sound implementation. Now, because strategy and the marketplace is always in change, the environment of business will continue to change. The strategies we have adopted right now that have worked in 2020 might turn out not to work again in 2021 or 2022. And so, due to constant change in technology and production environment, implementation of the strategy must remain ongoing process rather than a one-time allocation of resources. So you cannot say that you have implemented what you have done and that is all. No, it must be an ongoing process. There must be a feedback effect which will result towards a fresh, designing of a new approach to the whole strategic system, so that it will become a continuum. It will not end, because the business environment continue to change, and continue to change. The implementation strategy continue to also change in order to adapt with what the current happenings. Now, during the period of implementation and subsequent phase, several decisions have to be made. In the implementation phase, you have to make series of decisions to ensure, that you remain viable and you remain competitive. Capacity. And when we talk about capacity, we're talking about your strength, that is your abilities, your internal ability. Now when we talk about capacity, we're talking about amount, we're talking about time, and we're talking about types. Now the next decision you have to take has to do with what? Facilities. Do you have the right size? Are you operating from the right location? Then do you have relevant specialization capacity? Are you focused in the relevant specialization? The next decision is to talk about technology. The decision as it has to do with technology. What is your process choice? The equipment, the automation directions. Do you have the relevant to meet with the current happenings? These are decisions that will continue to change. I discussed ago about some of the iPhone chip, some of the chip that we use in iPhone, that the lifespan is so short that most times after I have spent millions of dollars to produce that chip, you have a matter of the partnership. Because you need to know that you have the required size and you are in the required location with the right specialized people. Know that you have the process choices, the right equipment, and the automation direction to be able to deliver this in an IT. Now when we move to a certain level in this class, we will talk about the strength of a supplier. Now, at the point to discover that the one that supplies you raw material might wielding significant power. Now, one of that might be for you to go and is a supplier. Okay, that situation, you might decide to go and supplier. These are things that you must have to extend. The demographic distribution in the society must be factored in. Now, the demographic distribution in the society plays a significant role in this workforce, in the sense the workforce mostly are not aged population. The aged population and the younger ones are already out of this workforce. Now, in some country, we have a large number of the population at the aging group. In other words, they have a very fewer workforce. So you must understand the environment where you are operating, whether your environment where you are operating is such that your workforce, what is your wage policy? You have to take all these things into consideration. The next decision is the decision on what? Quality. What is your quality policy? What is your policy on defects and prevention of defectiveness, monitoring and control? These are the key things you have to look at when you talk about what? The quality decision. And you remember, quality is one of the performance. What are the parameters we identified? I talked about cost. I said that most of these performance parameters are, work in opposite direction. What do we mean by that? As you try to improve quality, you will be to compromise on cost, because to get the best of quality, you have to pay the highest what of price. So as you try to get the best of quality, you compromise on what the cost per unit. So you need to factor all these things as the raw material changes, as the components of your input changes. Looking at your quality, you need to take constant decisions with respect to your quality. Then the last one is what? Production, planning, and materials control. Now, this has a lot to do with how do you source for your material? Do you decentralize your sourcing for raw material? Do you centralize it? What are the production process? What is your acceptable normal wastage? What is your level of abnormal wastage? At what level would you consider a wastage as abnormal? All these things comes under this item 7. This decision will continually, over and over again as you continue implementing your strategy. Now, the next thing is talking about what? Operational focus. Remember, what we've talked here is key decisions that must be taken in order to ensure that you implement your strategy. But here we're talking about focus.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Your screen is off.
Off.
Your sharing, yes, it's no longer shared again.
Seriously. Sorry about that. My network sort of went off. Sorry, my network went off. Please, can you see the screen now?